Happy New Year, everybody, from the Flagship podcast. I am Chip Brown of horns247.com. And of course, joined as always by our fearless leader, the managing editor of Horns 24/7, the one and only Taylor Estes. Taylor, how are you doing?
I am doing much better now. I want to apologize to our listeners. We had a bit of a hiatus for the last week because I tested positive for COVID last Wednesday. So I'm currently day 7. I believe I'm still positive, but I'm at least feeling much better. I will say I kind of dodged a bullet when I had it back in September, had no symptoms, and it was like, oh, you got away with it that time. Here's a double whammy because this last week has been pretty miserable, but I'm glad to be back, Chip. Our first show of us together of 2022. It seems weird considering it's January 12th and we're having our first show this year. How are you doing?
Yeah, no, I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Had a great holiday. Had my son, who's a freshman at Colorado State who made a 3.6 in his business
Hey.
classes. Well, he made a 3.6 overall, but he's majoring in business first semester. So I got that for a Christmas present. I'm so happy and excited about that. And my daughter's doing great. So I'm I'm ready to talk some football because Taylor, we're a week away from classes starting for the spring semester, which means early enrollees and signing day coming up in February. So lots to talk about. Also, Texas basketball, obviously both the men and women ranked in the top 25 and have looked impressive at times and not so impressive here lately at times. But we'll get into all of it. And I think you know we're also hearing about Texas doing some portal fishing, transfer portal fishing, and Taylor, probably the biggest name right now is TCU's O'Shawn Mathis, a 3-year starter, a second team All Big 12, defensive lineman, defensive end, 14 career sacks, 30 career tackles for loss, had 9 sacks as a sophomore, and we're hearing Texas might be in a good position to pick up TCU defensive lineman O'Shawn Mathis.
Yeah, and that could be a huge addition if Texas can land him. According to Mike Roach's sources, his name isn't did appear in the transfer portal, and as of Wednesday, the Longhorns really started picking up steam with this. But this is a big time get, Chip. I mean, because there's no denying that Texas could definitely use a lot more experienced bodies on both lines of scrimmage. Let's be honest, but also on defensive line at that edge position. And it's kind of interesting the timing of this because a former TCU head coach has been on campus at Texas, and all of a sudden this a defensive minded guy in Gary Patterson, and now Texas is potentially in the lead for O'Shawn Mathis, which is a big get. But I imagine that may have helped Gary Patterson with his talks with Steve Sarkisian. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there was interest from Steve Sarkisian before the O'Shawn Mathis possibility, but this all just makes it that much more um, beneficial to the Longhorns, certainly. And you bring up a great point because Gary Patterson, we're just waiting on the news release for an announcement that Patterson will be joining Texas's football operation. Um, and, you know, he can do a lot of different things. So we'll wait for Steve Sarkisian to outline the job description. But we've already talked about how Gary Patterson's wife, Kelsey, went to school at Texas, worked for DeLoss Dodds when he was the athletic director. She worked for one of UT's biggest boosters, Bill Duvall, who runs Lincoln Properties. So Gary knows the boosters, the way things work at Texas. He could help Steve Sarkisian, whether it's scouting opponents, helping with giving thoughts to defensive game plans, that kind of thing. But he can also help with, um, you know, being a liaison to the athletic department or, booster groups because he certainly gets that, and his former athletic director at TCU is now the athletic director at Texas. So that's another exciting element for Texas fans to sort of keep an eye on. Now you add in O'Shawn Mathis, and if you've been following our man Mike Roach, he wrote this week about the fact that Alabama, well, obviously Mario Williams, we should start there, the OU wide receiver, big play guy, was on campus, is on campus. We're recording this on Wednesday, and that's significant. I mean, I think USC has to be considered the favorite for Mario Williams because all indications are that Caleb Williams is probably going to be headed from OU to USC, but it says something that he is on campus, and anytime you take a visit to a school close to when you're going to be making the decision, it gives you a chance, Taylor.
Yeah, it does. And this is a position of need. Obviously, any Texas fan that watched last season knows that wide receiver is still remains, a position of need for Texas in the transfer portal. The Longhorns did a really good job of getting the needs at offensive line, defensive line in the 2022 early signing period back in December. But the wide receiver position still is kind of a question mark, I think, Chip, going into the season. And adding a guy, I mean, he was named a true freshman All-American by ESPN, and Mario Williams was, that is, played in 11 of 12 games, was a key playmaker for the Sooners and for Lincoln Riley. And you're right. I think that there's no denying that. I think any of the offensive skill players, especially that may be entering the transfer portal or considering transferring from Oklahoma, I think all of our automatic thought is USC is probably the landing spot, especially if Caleb Williams does end up with the Trojans. I believe over the weekend he was taking a visit to USC. There's pictures of him spotted at, I forget which NFL game it was. Was it the Chargers game that he was spotted at?
Probably.
I think yeah. So, Caleb Williams was out in Los Angeles over the weekend. So that could obviously change, where Texas stands in looking at Mario Williams. But the fact that Texas is in the mix, especially at a position of need, that's what we've talked over and over again about, adding experience to the wide receiver room. And that would be something that Texas would have to probably address in the transfer portal. Now Texas at least has their receivers coach in place after hiring Pitt receivers coach Brennan Marion. Now they can sell. Brennan Marion had the Bolitnikoff Award winner. His name's escaping me, but at Pitt this past year. So he knows what he's doing. He can sell that for Texas. And if Texas can stay in the mix with Mario Williams, that could be a difference maker, Chip, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you're right. They absolutely need to add talent, experience, both to the wide receiver room after, Joshua Moore ends up transferring to Texas Tech. And, you've only gotten two proven playmakers really in Xavier Worthy and, Jordan Whittington. And then you're hoping that guys like Troy O'Meary, Calvante Dixon can take the next step, but that's still thin. And you had three big time receivers decommit in the 2022 class, including five-star Evan Stewart, who ended up at A&M. So that's why Brennan Marion is here. I mean, we've reported extensively about that at Horns 24/7 that Steve Sarkisian's biggest, beef with receivers coach Andre Coleman was recruiting.
Yeah.
Andre Coleman tended to go for the more chip on the shoulder guy with something to prove. Sarkisian wants Ferraris, and so they're going after Ferrari with Mario Williams, who's the third ranked prospect in the portal right now, according to 24/7 Sports. Of course, behind Caleb Williams, who's number one. So a couple other names on that list are Alabama linebacker Drew Sanders and Alabama tight end Jaleel Billingsley, and those are big names. I mean, Drew Sanders was a five-star recruit out of Denton Ryan, and Jaleel Billingsley has been making plays at the highest level for 3 years. I mean, he's a proven guy, but Alabama always has so much talent that one injury, you can fall behind, get recruited over, which is kind of what happened with Drew Sanders. And, for Jaleel Billingsley, I think it's interesting. Jeff Banks was his position coach at Alabama. So maybe there's a, better relationship there than is, on the Alabama roster. I don't know. But
Right.
the bottom line is those guys are in the portal and Texas is all over them.
Yeah, and linebacker obviously is a position of need, plus tight end as well. After Texas lost Jared Wiley to the transfer portal, I mean, no offense, Jared Wiley, I'm not sure how big of a loss that truly is, but I feel like we were talking before we started recording. He didn't necessarily fit the type of offensive system that they need the tight ends to be. Under Steve
Yeah, he's
Sarkisian,
more
he's
of an
more of
air raid tight
yeah.
end that doesn't have to block as much as what Steve Sarkisian wants, and he'll find that at TCU with Sonny Dykes.
Yeah, for sure. So those are two, key positions. And, if Texas, anytime I feel like you can pull some talent from Alabama, it's usually a good sign because even their backups, a lot of them are 4 and 5 star former prospects. And, as you mentioned, Drew Sanders, the linebacker of Alabama, he was a composite 5 star prospect in the 2020 class. So he, already has a lot of experience or a lot of, playing time left at his college career. Plus, he does have the experience of at least being in a college program. He played mainly, I think, on special teams, I believe, in 2021, but that's not necessarily saying much. That's a 5 star sitting behind 5 stars on the roster there at Alabama. So, I think if Texas can get either of those two, if not both, I mean that's a big get for the Longhorns. And you'll I think we'll see what type of recruiting chops the Texas staff still has with the Alabama players, with Jeff Banks, Steve Sarkisian, AJ Milwee, all coming from Alabama. But there's no doubt that I think Jeff Banks' relationship in the recruitment of Jaleel Billingsley will probably come through huge, and Texas could definitely use more bodies at tight end and again at linebacker too. So those are definitely guys to watch for Texas in the next few weeks as they look to make their decision.
Yeah, with Cade Brewer and Jared Wiley both moving on, you've got the young guns. You've got Jatavian Sanders, Gunnar Helm, Juan Davis, but there's not a lot of experience. There's almost no experience there. So that would be a good place to add. And of course, you have the burnt ends NIL
Mm-hmm.
program
That's true.
for the tight ends, which I believe guarantees them like 10 grand a year. So
Not bad.
not bad, not bad.
Yeah.
Another something to think about. Um, okay, so while we're mentioning the transfer portal, Casey Thompson has landed at Nebraska, and hopefully that'll be a good spot for him. But Taylor, the early enrollees, as we prepare for classes to begin, the early enrollees for Texas are safety Brian Allen, defensive lineman Jere Bledsoe, running back Jaden Blue, cornerback Xavion Bryce, cornerback Terrence Brooks, defensive lineman Aaron Bryant, quarterback Quinn Ewers, edge rusher Justice Finkley, cornerback Jalen Gilbo, offensive lineman Cole Hudson, quarterback Malik Murphy, and cornerback Ryan Watts, the Ohio State transfer. So obviously the name that's going to jump off that page to everyone is quarterback Quinn Ewers. He needs to get in and start digesting this voluminous Steve Sarkisian offense and go through the spring and get as comfortable as he can in learning this offense, because it's a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a lot. And Steve Sarkisian has never hidden that. The quarterbacks at Texas have never shied away from talking about the amount that they really have to digest. And every single day. I mean, when you go back to the season when Casey Thompson would talk about how much film he would watch, I don't think that was just because he was so addicted to watching film. I think it was because you have to have that diligence to be the quarterback in this offensive scheme. And while I know everybody's really excited to see Quinn Ewers, and I personally am excited to see him too. I mean, we haven't really seen him play much of any football since 2019, basically. So I'm really excited to see what this kid can do. But you also, I think, need to have the patience. We've talked about this over and over again, and I know that can be a trigger word for some Texas fans, and I don't mean it to be a trigger word at all. But there's a lot that these quarterbacks really have to take in running this offense. And, Steve Sarkisian asks a lot of the quarterbacks, and he demands a lot of them too. It's not just, do things right and then you could work out. It's no, you do things right and you need to do it at an elite level. And I think that was, kind of the ups and downs that the quarterback position had in the 2021 season. I don't necessarily think it's because of a lack of talent. I think it's, there's just a lot thrown at them. And with being in a new system, learning a new system and not having the normal 2021 off season, having hiccups with COVID, having that freeze, having the death of Jake Ellinger, there was a lot of adversity that the team in general had to make it through during the off season, and that doesn't help when you're trying to learn a scheme or an offense as detailed as what Steve Sarkisian has. So, Quinn Ewers definitely has a lot of catching up to do, I think, but his raw talent probably puts him a little bit ahead of Hudson Card right now. But where Hudson Card, I think, Chip, has the advantage is he does at least understand what all is involved in this offense, what the playbook looks like. I imagine Quinn Ewers has the playbook too, and has probably been working on studying that, ever since he signed with Texas. But there's no doubt that he's got a lot of learning to do, and it's going to be interesting to see how this, quarterback battle kind of shakes out through spring practice. And also I'm excited to see Malik Murphy too. I mean,
Yeah.
this kid has a lot of upside, and I know he's kind of been overlooked ever since Quinn Ewers signed with Texas, and understandably so. I mean, Quinn Ewers was the highest rated quarterback prospect coming out of high school since Vince Young. So in 20 years, he was the highest rated one in that time frame. But I don't think you count out Malik Murphy either, because he's a really talented athlete and he's a little raw. But I'm excited to see kind of how he fits into this, quarterback position room in spring practice and, leading into the 2022 season.
Yeah. It it's a lot. And here's the thing. I think the quarterback position got scapegoated some last year in that 6-game losing streak. It wasn't all the quarterback play that was contributing to those losses. And Hudson Card deserves a second chance from Texas fans. I mean, the jump from year one of an offense to year two is substantial and needs to be substantial. And Texas fans are going to be all about Quinn Ewers, or a bunch of the Texas fans are going to be all about Quinn Ewers. Get him on the field. How can he not start? And that's part of the problem with where Texas has been the last 8-9 years. It's been all about the hype and the hope, and not enough about the grind and the process and gaining experience and learning, and then becoming a leader and helping to lead this program forward. That leadership keeps rotating from coach to coach, now player to player. The quarterback position obviously is the most important in football, because he touches the ball every play and is basically responsible for one phase of the 3 phases of the game. But Hudson Card has the most experience. We know he's talented. Can he get comfortable? Can he gain that pocket presence that he needs? Can he, build on his relationship with the playmakers already on campus for this offense, and also help tutor Quinn Ewers, because it's a team. They got to help each other. They got to lift each other up, even though they're competing at the same position. And how will Quinn Ewers fit into the locker room? He's made all this NIL money, and they're veterans who haven't made a nickel off of NIL. So there's a lot of stuff that is going to sort itself out. And it's great that he's come in for spring football because that's enormous. And because I do feel like there's a bit of a start over now at the quarterback position. Because Hudson Card had some good moments, but he had some tough moments. And the last time we saw him, he suffered a strip sack and threw a pick six in the Kansas game. And so, it's, West Virginia, and then he, got hurt in the West Virginia game. But, um, he needs to be able to work his way back and develop, and fans need to have an open mind. I mean,
Yes,
what if Malik
absolutely.
Murphy is the the best quarterback in the spring?
Yeah, no, for sure. And this goes back to Steve Sarkisian was hired as the head coach of Texas for a lot of reasons, but his ability to develop the quarterback position and his him being regarded as one of the best play callers in football. Those are two of the big reasons why he is the head coach at Texas. So if Steve Sarkisian at this point, Chip, there's no reason to question his decision making at the quarterback position. I think there were some times, leading into the 2021 season and going with Hudson Card, then going with Casey Thompson, there were some questions a little bit, but still, at the end of the day, he was breaking in a first time starter, regardless of who it was. And you're always going to have ups and downs, or I should say, more times than not, you're going to have ups and downs when that's the case. Maybe if you're Caleb Williams, you don't have that, but more times than not, first time starting quarterbacks at the college level, they're going to have some growing pains that you have to get through. You have to just make it through them and continue to press on. But I think that this is where it's going to be probably a tough task, I think, especially for a lot of Texas fans, if, say, the situation were to play out where Hudson Card is ahead of Quinn Ewers. That doesn't mean that Quinn Ewers is a bust. It doesn't mean that Steve Sarkisian doesn't know what he's doing. It means that he's a little bit further ahead, and that's okay. And you go back to look at Vince Young. I mean, he didn't start every single season that he was on campus.
All right, Chance
Um,
Mock.
yeah, Chance Mock started over him, and
He had
Vince Young's
15 touchdowns and 2 interceptions when he got benched for Vince Young.
yeah, and you can argue that Vince Young is probably one of the most elite quarterbacks in college, at least in recent college football history. And so, but he still wasn't ready day one. He had the perfect, one rating as a recruit coming out
And
of
he
high
redshirted.
school. Yeah, and he did not start day one, and that's okay. And I think that in today's world, and it's not just Texas fans, I think it's just in general, when there's so much attention on recruiting now, especially in the rankings and the ratings and everything. And it's easy for a lot of people to expect day one All Americans when a 5-star signs. However, there are very few day one All Americans, even if they were the best player coming out of high school. So, you're going to have to really try to practice patience. I hate to say that because I know it really probably bothers people when I say that word, but you do have to understand that Steve Sarkisian was hired for this exact situation. He got one of, he was able to hold on to Hudson Card, which is a good thing because at least there's one quarterback that has a full year of understanding the offense. Even though he didn't start every game, he did start some games. He did enough to earn the starting quarterback tag at the start of the season. That's a good thing that he's still on campus. And then Steve Sarkisian got the top-rated quarterback prospect in 2 decades to transfer from Ohio State. That was huge. So just trust. If Quinn Ewers came to Texas because Steve Sarkisian sold him on it, maybe trust the process here. And it's going to be interesting to watch regardless. I feel like you and I are probably like a little bit. I don't want to say having people temper their expectations, but maybe tap the brakes a little bit just for our own sanity and, going over at Horns 24/7 if this plays out where Hudson Card ends up being ahead of Quinn Ewers coming out of the spring. But I think that Texas is, even with losing Casey Thompson, Chip, I feel that Texas quarterback room is probably in a better situation now than it was, say the week 12 of the 2021 season.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I do know that there's talent in that room, and Steve Sarkisian will will bring it out of them, and this place is tough on the quarterback position. We've, Garrett Gilbert, David Ash, Case McCoy. I mean, fans were rough on Case McCoy, like to the point where you couldn't believe it, because all the guy did was win in some big spots for them. But this place is tough. I mean, it comes
Mhm.
with the territory. If you want to be the quarterback at Texas, you got to have second guessers and doubters breathing down your neck, and you got to pretend it's a scarf to keep you warm because you can't let that stuff get to you. You got too much going on between the white lines. So it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun to watch that position develop, and hopefully it goes better than expected. Because right now, look, there's so much in this offense because they run everything, because they run a gap scheme and zone on the offensive line. There's all kinds of protections that have to be called, all kinds of motions that have to be called, in addition to just calling the play. It's a lot. And Steve Sarkisian is on the record saying he doesn't like starting first year quarterbacks because there's too much to learn. So it's going to take a while. And the spring football may be ugly. Remember, they don't have any offensive linemen.
Right.
That leads us into the next point, Taylor, and that is, of all those early enrollees, you're excited Quinn Ewers is in there. You're excited, all those guys are in there. Um, you know, the cornerbacks, Terrence Brooks and Ryan Watts, but only one offensive lineman, and that's Cole Hudson. He's a good one. But all those studs that Texas signed late, Kelvin Banks, Cameron Williams, um, you know, NATO, Umazula, and Malik Agbo, Connor Robertson, they are not enrolling early, and that's a bummer. That's probably my biggest disappointment of the of spring, that more of those offensive linemen are not early enrollees, but that's the way it is, and we've talked about how that may mean Texas only has 11 scholarship offensive linemen going through, hell, walk-ons too, going through spring, and that is going to make it tough. It's going to make it tough to run two fields and not have guys just getting totally gassed.
Yeah, that will be. And it kind of remember last spring, it was kind of similar. They didn't really have much of a depth behind a 2 deep. They had the starting 5 on the orange team and starting 5 on the white team. That was pretty much it for the offensive line. And yeah, I agree, Chip, that is a little bit of a disappointment for that position because obviously these guys are coming in. They're very highly touted prospects. And, with offensive linemen, you definitely don't want to have to always rely on true freshmen for sure. But if you are relying on a true freshman, you better hope that they at least went through spring practice. You look back to, oh my goodness, why is his name losing me? Zach Shackelford. When he came in, he started as a true freshman. He was there at least in spring practice. He had he kind of understood the process of the college game a little bit more, to be a little bit more prepared to start his true freshman year. But that's not necessarily any offensive line coach's, ideal scenario at all. And so the fact that these guys not only may be required to be ready to go as true freshmen, but the fact that they're not coming in for spring, that's definitely a letdown. And that kind of makes me wonder, Chip, do you think that at this point, the offensive line is still a position that Texas may look to tackle in the transfer portal to add immediate, guys that can start immediately and have some experience there?
I think so. I mean,
Mhm.
they said they would take up to 9 in some combination of high school prospects and in the portal, and so they still have a couple spots they could use on offensive line if they find one they can connect with. So it is what it is, and Texas is it. Look, it's going to give the guys who are returning, the Andre Carricks, the Hayden Connors, um, more reps, and those guys need to develop
Yeah.
and put some pressure on guys like Christian Jones. And one of those tackle positions is available. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, Calvin Banks, he's the highest rated tackle in the 2022 recruiting class. Surely he'll be the starter. You never know.
Yeah.
I mean, Connor Williams and Sam Cosmi were 3-star recruits who had unbelievable work ethic and want to, and they came in and started, not Tyler Johnson, the high 4-star. Some had him as a 5-star offensive lineman. So you just have to wait and see who wants it, who's going to put in the work, who's going to grind. And unfortunately, you're not going to see, 5 of those guys until June.
Yeah.
And so that is what it is. And, Brian Allen at safety, that's huge that he's going through spring because Texas is empty. I mean,
Mhm.
they got Jaron Thompson and JD Coffee at safety unless they're going to start moving people around. So, Brian Allen needs to come in, seize the day, and show what he's got, because he could end up. Well, he'll be in the rotation immediately when he gets on campus. He wants to be there when the season starts.
Yeah.
Um, Taylor, real quick on Texas basketball before we get to love it or leave it. I think Texas fans were a little surprised by the loss at Oklahoma State last Saturday. The team just they weren't the more aggressive team, and Oklahoma State took it to them. And even though it was a 4 and 5 point game in the second half, it got away. And Oak State is, a big, long team. You didn't want them to start figuring things out against Texas. They did. So a 7-5 team puts Texas's first Big 12 loss in the loss column. But Texas bounces back with I thought, surprisingly comfortable win over Oklahoma. At home, they win by 14, and that game was never really in doubt. Andrew Jones attacking, going to the free throw line, 22 points, 4 steals. He embodied exactly what Chris Beard was talking about in terms of we've got to be the more aggressive team. And so Texas now heads to Iowa State Saturday, and Hilton Coliseum is a really tough place to play. And you never know what's going on with these COVID-19 protocols, but Texas appears to be in pretty good shape. Trey Mitchell did play a couple minutes. They're very skilled big man. They're to me, they're like number one um, scoring option. I mean, the ball should be going through him, and then if he doesn't have something, kick it out for an outside shot. That's how skilled he is. And so they need him healthy. And this will be a really good test because let's be honest, Texas has struggled on the road. Obviously, they played Gonzaga and they played ranked Seton Hall team at the time. But then you lose to Oklahoma State when no one's looking. And so they've got to establish their toughness on the road against, people don't even know who Iowa State's coach is. TJ Otzelberger, who was a longtime assistant at Iowa State under Greg McDermott and Fred Hoiberg and Steve Prohm, before going on to become the head coach at South Dakota State and UNLV. He's got this team playing hard, and they're 12-3. So this is in fact, Iowa State beat Texas Tech. That's Texas Tech's only conference loss at this point. So this will be a good indicator of how tough this team can be on the road on Saturday.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think Iowa State's actually 13-3, but they've lost 3 conference games. They lost to Baylor, Oklahoma, and Kansas. And you kind of wonder, okay, Texas just stuck it to Oklahoma. Does that mean that this is going to be a win? I don't know. I mean, I think that you're right with this Texas basketball team. They've got to figure out how to play better on the road and play more consistently. But I do think that the COVID situation has absolutely altered this. I mean, there's 5 people on the court, and if one of your your starting guys are out, I mean that's a big loss. It's not like a starter on an offense is out for football. It's totally different. There has to be some type of, um, you know, not necessarily teamwork, but they have to gel together. I think that especially the starting 5 on, in basketball, they definitely have to gel together. And the unknown with COVID, protocols coming in, you never know what game's going to be canceled. I feel like right now, and as somebody that just had COVID, I will say I understand why some of these games are being canceled if players have symptoms, because that was no fun. But yeah, I mean, I think that this will be a really interesting test, because I'm not really sure who Iowa State is right now. You look at their record; they have the same record as Texas, 13. I think Texas is 13-3, right? Too, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they both had the same record. Obviously, Texas played a little bit more challenging opponents, I guess you could say, in the non-conference play. But Iowa State losing to 3 conference teams, that's their only 3 losses. And they're, Baylor obviously is a pretty solid team. Kansas, pretty solid team. So this is going to
But
be a
they beat
really,
Tech, and Tech just beat Kansas and
they did.
Baylor. So
That's true. Yeah. So, and that's where it's like I just don't know. I have no clue what this Iowa State team is right now. I really don't. And that can maybe be a good thing for Texas, or it could be a really bad thing. But I think that right now, Chris Beard really has got to get these guys focused when they're on the road. It's easier to play at home, but it's a lot more challenging, especially if you're a team with like Texas going on the road. Most teams in the Big 12 want to always beat Texas, regardless of the sport. It's not just in football, it's in basketball too. So this will be an interesting challenge, but I think it helps that Texas did at least get some confidence probably from that win, that dominating win over Oklahoma. As you mentioned, that wasn't even really close on Tuesday night.
yeah, and defensively they were outstanding. I mean, Tanner Groves, Oklahoma's leading scorer and rebounder, didn't attempt a shot until the 9:40 mark of the second half. Was finished with 3 points, 2 rebounds, was a non-factor in the game, and kudos to Dylan DeZoo and Christian Bishop. They doubled Tanner Groves hard, just like um, they doubled TJ Pack from Kansas State after Pack lit him up in the first half. But they're making some good defensive adjustments that are paying off, and this will be a good test. And the Texas women, they had their game against Baylor postponed because of COVID. Now they're taking on the most improved team in the Big 12, Kansas, this weekend, and we'll see how the Texas women continue to gel, and how their freshmen, especially point guard Rory Harmon, how she holds up, because man, Vic Schaefer's tough on his point guards, and the freshman wall is real. And Rory's been outstanding. I mean, she had 21 points in the win over defending national champion Stanford. She was outstanding against A&M. She's had a couple clunkers though, and that's okay. I mean, she's a freshman. I don't care how good she is. She was a top 10 player and all that, but that's a fun team. They're going to get better and better. All right, Taylor, you ready for some love it or leave it?
I am, Chip. Before we get to love it or leave it, we're going to take a really quick break. But stick around, because football talk never ends, even though it's the off season right now on the Flagship podcast. So stay tuned. We will be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on here to love it or leave it. Make sure that if you are not already subscribed to the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, head on over to youtube.com/Horns 24/7. Hit the subscribe button, click the bell to get notifications on all the latest videos that we will be releasing. This off season, we're going to really be working to bulk up our video presence over at Horns 24/7. So you want to be ahead of it. You don't want to be searching for our videos. You want to get the notifications straight to your phone or your inbox, whenever we post something new. So head on over and make sure you subscribe to that. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the Horns 24/7 audio podcast on your favorite streaming device. And if you want to make our bosses, happy, feel free to go over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and review. And we'll read that on the air for the next ones for next show. I say you go over, leave us a review. We will definitely read it next show next week here on the Flagship podcast. But with that said, Chip, you ready for some love it or leave it?
I am. And you're getting over COVID and I'm battling cedar fever. Um, my eyes are on fire, but I'm ready for some love it or leave it.
Hey, this is the first time I've worn makeup in over a week. I was pretty proud of it. I was like, oh, my skin's so fresh and clean. Then I just clog it up with makeup because I have to be on front of here. But my eyes are the same thing. I'll tell you, having COVID and cedar fever at the same time, I didn't know what. I was like, just end it now, please.
Oh,
Like, just, I slept basically all day. So I was like, I don't want to be awake. I feel terrible. And I don't know what symptoms it is, if it's COVID or cedar fever. But welcome to Central Texas. There you
that's
go.
right.
All right, Chip. My first love it or leave it topic for you is love it or leave it. Texas football truly is in rebuild mode as the Longhorns head into 2022.
Yeah, I'm gonna love this because, you're starting over at quarterback. You have to improve the offensive line. Does that mean wholesale changes? Does that mean, um, newcomers who are going to be learning the position starting in June? And yes, you have Bijan Robinson and Roshan Johnson and Xavier Worthy, a freshman All-American, and Jordan Whittington, but you don't know what you've got at tight end. You think you've got something in Gunnar Helm for sure, and Jatavian Sanders, and Juan Davis is more of the kind of the Jared Wiley big receiver mold. In fact, I've said if they can't figure something out at receiver, move Juan Davis to receiver because he and Troy O'Meary are about the same size, and Juan Davis is really fast.
Mhm.
So, but there's a lot of unknowns. And look, anytime you're starting over a quarterback, it's a big old question mark. I don't care how talented the guy is who's bucking for the job. And so, and defensively, they were all over the place last year. I mean, we don't know if returning starters is a good thing right now. I mean,
Yeah.
that's how tough it was for this defense to get any level of consistency. We know they had good games, good halves, good quarters, but it wasn't. It was really hard to find a complete game, and so it does. It feels like rebuild mode, and you throw in the fact that Steve Sarkisian's talking about replacing a third of the roster. I don't know how you can look at it as any other way. So, yeah, rebuild mode, not reload. Taylor, how about you?
Yeah, I think you have to love it. I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, Steve Sarkisian is looking to have a third of the roster be entirely new players this year. I mean, if that's not a sign that this is a rebuild, I really don't know what is. I think that I don't necessarily know if many people expected there to be this big of a rebuild going into year two. I think a lot of people obviously expected to have some rebuild in 2021, especially in replacing Sam Ellinger. I feel like a lot of Texas fans probably grew a lot of appreciation for Sam Ellinger that they may not have had when he was on campus this past year, because Texas was kind of really fortunate to have just a consistent starting quarterback that they had for 4 years. And anytime you are starting over at the quarterback position, obviously it's going to be a rebuild. I mean, as you said earlier, the quarterback's the only player that touches the ball on every offensive series, and every offensive play. Him and the center are the only ones that touch the ball every single time. So, and the fact that the Texas offensive line has been, I mean, I feel bad. I don't want to knock
Needs to
them
be
because I feel
upgraded.
like, yeah, it's like I just you got to call it what it is. That offensive line was terrible at times last year, and it still is in a rebuild mode. I think that obviously I do believe that Kyle Flood knows what he's doing. I don't think that the production or lack thereof at offensive line was necessarily an indication of his coaching ability. I think it was just showing that he was hindered to what he had available to him. And the fact that Texas has not been doing very well at recruiting the offensive line in the years prior, and the ones that they signed, it seems like they're all gone. I mean, even some of or they haven't panned out. I mean, that's not necessarily on Kyle Flood. I think it's just a miss from the former staff, honestly, at the position. So, yeah, all that to say, and that's before we even get to the defensive side of the ball, which, again, I do kind of believe. I know a lot of people were down on Pete Kwiatkowski, but, how much of it was a personnel issue as opposed to a, coaching issue? I think that, in hindsight's 2020, obviously, I think that most Texas fans that were down on Pete Kwiatkowski, if you go back and actually look at the roster and the guys he had at his disposal, he was kind of hindered too, similar to Kyle Flood on the offensive line. I mean, you can only get so much out of guys if they've reached their talent ceiling, and maybe their talent ceiling on defense last year was a lot lower than I think a lot of people expected. So yeah, all that to say, absolutely, this is still a rebuild. And I honestly, Chip, though, when you look at when Steve Sarkisian was hired, he was given a 6-year contract, and every head coach, at least in my time covering Texas, so in the last 10 seasons, every first-year head coach that was hired got a 5-year deal. I really do believe that Steve Sarkisian was given 6 years because I think that Chris Del Conte understood the challenge that was ahead, and that was and this is just my opinion, but I really think that played into the decision to give him 6 years instead of 5, like the standard first year head coaching contracts have been, at least for Tom Herman and for Charlie Strong. And I think that's definitely an indication of where the program is. I think that Chris Del Conte understood that this is going to be a challenge, especially losing, a Sam Ellinger and not having that starting veteran, quarterback, that leader in the locker room. I think that there's a lot of things that probably played into him getting a 6-year deal. And, I think a lot of that starts with he knew that this was going to be a rebuild and it was going to be a lengthy one, no doubt. But yeah, you have to love it, I think.
All right. Love it or leave it, number 2.
Number 2 is love it or leave it. The position you're most excited about going into 2022 is running back, and most concerned about is safety.
I'm going to leave this. I mean, I'm definitely excited about the running back position. I'm excited about Xavier Worthy and Jordan Whittington getting another year better. I'll love that. But my biggest concern is going to be quarterback, because you've got Quinn Ewers learning the offense. We don't know what kind of line he or Hudson Card are going to be playing behind yet. You would hope it's going to be upgraded, but as we said, going through the spring, there might be only 11 offensive linemen available. And Steve Sarkisian likes to run 2 fields, meaning there's the 1 offense on that field and the 2 offense on that field, and they need 10 offensive linemen to make that happen.
Right.
And if you're down to 11 for spring football, so you want the quarterback to be able to, get a good picture of what that life is going to be like. And I'm not sure how good that picture is going to be in the spring. So, and whatever line is up there needs to be able to protect these quarterbacks. So there's just a lot on that quarterback position. And I may not feel good about the quarterback position until fall camp, or even toward the end of fall camp, Taylor. That's how much there is for Quinn Ewers to learn, for Hudson Card to grow from. And so I will leave this. How about you?
Yeah, I'm going to leave it, but I definitely am very excited about the running back room. And also, as you mentioned, wide receiver. Honestly, you mentioned Troy O'Meary a little bit earlier, and I literally in my head thought like, oh, I forgot about him. So if he can come along, that receiver room may be a little bit better than it currently looks right now. But at least having Jordan Whittington and Xavier Worthy, that's 2 huge returners that they will have on offense. But I think that my biggest concern still remains the offensive line. And it's similar to what you said. You said this about the quarterback, but until I see the offensive line actually play consistently and not, perform at an elite level, but just not be terrible and not make bonehead mistakes and not constantly be penalized. I think I'm going to keep the mindset that this is a work in progress still. And so I think that, I definitely think there's definitely some concern at quarterback. I think that Texas at least has, at least currently, assuming that these guys are still on the roster after spring and they don't enter the transfer portal. But I think that there's at least enough capable bodies to play that position. But if the offensive line can't get it figured out in front of them, it doesn't matter who your quarterback is. I mean, unless it's a Colt McCoy in 2009 that hid some massive deficiencies on the offensive line because he was that good. I really think that the offense is going to go not just as the quarterback goes, and I know that's like the typical saying, but I think this offense is going to go more so how the offensive line goes. So that remains my biggest concern for Texas. And again, I think that Kyle Flood, he's proven himself as an ability to develop offensive linemen. It's probably a lot easier to develop some of the offensive linemen that Alabama had because they basically had their picking of whoever they wanted, the top players,
And they
every
all stayed on
recruiting class.
campus and just got better every year.
Exactly. But like you look at, I mean, it's just a different body of work. I think when you look at, watch the national championship game between Georgia and Alabama, I'm just like, God, how big are these guys? And you compare that to a Texas offensive line, you're like, gosh, how small are those guys? So there's still a lot of work to be done, both from a development standpoint, but also I think from a personnel standpoint on the offensive line. And since it was so, bad at times and mediocre at best a lot. I think in 2021, I think that's going to always be a concern until it's kind of a show me, don't tell me at this point. That's where I'm at with the offensive line. I feel like I have been there for a number of years at Texas, just because there's been, I've only seen 2 offensive linemen drafted in my career, and they were both low 3-star prospects, diamond in the roughs that, probably wouldn't have been at Texas if it wasn't for the head coach's relationships at the time of when they took over the job in Charlie Strong and Tom Herman, with Sam Cosmi and Connor Williams. So yeah, that position is going to be a concern until I see otherwise.
Yeah. All right. Love it or leave it. Number 3.
All right. My final one for you is love it or leave it. The biggest concern for Texas basketball right now is players getting into a rhythm with each other despite setbacks due to COVID-19 protocols.
Yeah, I'll love this. I mean, I think for Chris Beard, he's trying to figure out you bring in these 6 transfers who are all highly decorated and were all coveted, and then you got to find out how they fit, and you got to find out who do we go to in the final 4 minutes of a close game? Who do we go to for one possession on a last second shot? All that stuff is being learned as we go. And let's be honest, Texas had 3 tough non-conference games and a lot of easy games where they weren't pushed and they weren't put in those situations. Now they are getting put in those situations, and Chris Beard is learning about who's going to step up, who's bringing the energy every night, who's doing this, who's doing that. In the first 3 Big 12 games, they have missed a key player. Against West Virginia, they didn't have Andrew Jones. Then, they go to K-State, they didn't have Chase Febris, and, Trey Mitchell then sits out because of COVID protocol. So Trey Mitchell's a guy they have to have on the floor, and he's too skilled offensively. And I get Dylan Dezou's probably the better defensive presence down low. It'd be great if you could combine those two. But, Trey Mitchell is skilled offensively, and we know that Texas has struggled to find rhythm offensively. And so they've got to use this first trip through the Big 12 to get all that stuff figured out, Taylor, so that once they hit, mid-February, they know exactly who they're going to in those situations.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think I'm gonna Love it. I think that the rhythm of the team is so instrumental. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, there's only 5 guys on the court. It's not like there's 11 on each side of the ball like in football. And so, if they're not gelling well together, that's going to lead to at least some question marks and probably some inconsistent play. And then you throw in the fact that there's a pandemic that is literally causing players, even if they aren't symptomatic, they still have to sit out. And I am sorry if you hear that. There's a trash man outside of my window right now, and it sounds like somebody is killing a cat or something. So I apologize if you hear that. But throw in the COVID protocol wrinkle, and you just never know what you're going to get each week in general. So I think that this is definitely I'm not sure if a concern would be the right word that I would use. I would say a question. The biggest question for Texas basketball right now is the players getting into a rhythm. All things considered, not just the fact that a lot of these guys came from various schools from the transfer portal, came in trying to gel with the few guys that were remaining on campus. But also, playing in a rhythm when you may have some of those guys out. Yeah, that's going to be a question, I feel like. And I guess the good thing is, it's not just a question for Texas necessarily, because it's not like they're the only school that's been dealing with COVID protocols. This is something that they just kind of, college basketball in general, unfortunately, with it starting conference play, happens to be at like the highest peak of this pandemic in the last few years, So it's something everyone's going to work through, but definitely having, so many different transfers coming from so many different schools and, coming into Texas with a first-year head coach, there already was going to be, a concern or a question of how they flow and gel and how their rhythm is together. And so, yeah, this is definitely a question and a concern for Texas. And, Chris Beard's a good coach, though. So this will be a challenging task for him, especially as a first-year head coach, to maneuver the whole situation. But in general, I mean, I think that you'll learn a lot, honestly, about Chris Beard and what he can do at Texas this year because of the unfortunate situation with the COVID-19 protocols and pausing and guys missing the games.
Yeah, and later this month, Rick Barnes comes back to the Irwin Center January 29th for that Big 12 SEC Challenge. All right, good stuff. Good stuff. Taylor, good to have you back
Yes,
from
thank you.
a rough week, and it's good to be back with you all, our lovable listeners, our wonderfully dysfunctional family over at 24/7 Sports appreciates it, and that's where we'll be until next time. And so, and make sure you got your eyes and ears open for the Flagship podcast interview on Monday with Phil Dawson, the new head coach at Hyde Park High School in Austin, of course, the record-setting kicker at Texas and a 20-year NFL career. So um, we will see you then. Until next time, for Taylor Estes, I'm Chip Brown. We'll see you over at horns247.com. Until next time, stay safe and keep the faith.